Good morning, and welcome to Unity Church on the Mountain from my home. The title of the talk today is Collective Trauma. But before the talk, let us begin by affirming together the opening statement. There is only one presence and one power in my life and the universe, God. So let us take a moment to pause, breathing in and breathing out, relaxing into this moment. Let us affirm together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So, collective trauma. If you listened to the talk last week, then you know I'm defining trauma in this case to be not the traumatic event, not that outstanding, shocking event that brought the trauma to us, but that trauma is the way we internalize the event, our reaction to it. Trauma is a survival mechanism. We wrap that traumatic response up and we shove it into the darkness, or we run from it so that we can deal with the traumatic event in the moment. It becomes an obstacle to our spiritual growth when we leave it wrapped up, balled up in the shadow and run from it. In other words, we don't integrate it. We don't dissolve that wall and allow it to be a part of who we are. So the trauma is the internalization, our internal reaction to what has happened on the outside. Last week I spoke about personal trauma because personal traumas are a hindrance or an obstacle to our growth on the spiritual path. And they're an analog to collective trauma. In other words, we can learn about collective trauma by integrating our own personal traumas. The process is very similar and an analog to the other. It's just that a collective trauma is integrated collectively instead of individually. Now, we as individuals, we're going to see act as part of the group in the integration of the collective trauma. A common denominator is this presence, that we become present, that we become this coherent field, that we are in the flow of the universe, that we are in harmony with Spirit. It is from this place that the trauma is integrated. So let's talk for a minute about that process of coming together as a group to integrate collective traumas. So we set the intention that the group is coming together with the focus of integrating collective trauma. So that's the first step. We set that intention for the group, for this time that we share together, as a healing, a digestion, or an integration. These are different ways of looking at this process of integrating the collective trauma. So we set the intention of the group. And then as we meet together as one, this group moves to that presence, to the heart coherent field, that state of higher vibration, of mindfulness, meditative state, all of these ways that can be looked at, whichever one you prefer, but they're all about putting ourselves in that flow, in the harmony with Spirit. We're moving out of our normal ego consciousness and into that higher consciousness, or that Christ consciousness. We begin to hold that space as a group. When we're all there together, we begin to resonate with one another, and we reinforce that state of consciousness with each other. So after we've spent some time moving into this state of consciousness, we can define the collective trauma that we're going to deal with by just stating the trauma, maybe summarizing the event, but bringing together our minds into that, just further setting that intention, okay? We're focusing the group on a particular collective trauma that we're going to focus on, integrating in this meeting. I want to emphasize the meeting does not have to be in one physical location. As Spirit, we are connected always, no matter the distance between us. So this meeting can happen online, over the phone. Anyway, we almost need some kind of communication between us. But there's not the idea that we're in the same physical location is not a requirement for this to have effect. So we have set the intention of the group. We've brought ourselves together into the presence. And now we've stated that particular collective trauma that we're going to be working on. And now there's an invitation that is brought forward to the members of the group to share the personal experience of that individual with that trauma. And we're looking more for a personal relationship to the trauma. We're each invited, or there is that invitation, not a requirement, to share. And that perhaps even more important than the sharing is what the rest of the group is doing while the sharing is taking place. You see, we're not just listening. It's not a passive thing that the other members of the group are doing while one member is sharing. We continue to hold that presence. We continue to hold that coherent space where we are in this harmony with one another. And we reach out to that member who is sharing. And we feel that relationship with this person, so that we are in this same state of mind together, and we are lifting this vibration to that finer, that more refined, that presence. We hold that coherence for that person who is sharing, and we actually move into that same resonance as the person who is sharing. You can look at the analog of a guitar. The strings of the guitar are the person who is doing the sharing. And the body of the guitar is the rest of the group. You see, if this was just a string being plucked, you would barely be able to hear it. But because there's this body of the guitar acting as a mechanical amplifier, we all take part as the body. The body is vibrating. I can feel the body vibrate as the string is plucked. So we, the other members of the group, become the body of the guitar, and we share in this resonance that comes from the energy of describing. No, it's not the energy of describing. It's the energy that that person feels as they're describing the trauma, or more specifically, their relation to the trauma. And by being part of this resonance, we begin to experience that same trauma. And remember, we're holding that presence, so we're lifting it up. By holding that presence as we have this experience, we're shining the light of spirit on the trauma. The act of shining the light of spirit on the trauma is what begins this integration process. It begins this process of digesting that trauma, melting the walls that we have put around it as a collective group, whether that group is a family, a community, a nation, an ethnic group or race, or the entire of humanity. Because yes, there are traumas that we all share in common. So we begin this process of integration by shining the light of spirit on the trauma itself. And this is the digestion process. Our hope as humanity to ever move forward into that place where these traumatic events begin to become less and less frequent, less and less intensity, is this process of integrating the trauma. You see, just like in ourselves, as long as we hold this trauma, we continue to experience it over and over. Anytime there is something that triggers that experience, or those feelings, those inner feelings, that inner experience of that original traumatic event, we place that trauma in front of us and we walk that same path again. We do it ourselves in our individual experience of trauma, and we do it as a group. Something we can also remember is this is the way Spirit works with us, is as we begin to become aware of the trauma, as we begin this process of integration of the trauma, that trauma explodes into our experience of the world and begins to have a more noticeable effect in our life. It's like now we're having it again and again. But You see, that's how we can shine the light of Spirit on the trauma. When it brings itself to our awareness, we have that opportunity to move to the presence and begin this integration by shining the light of Spirit on the trauma. The trauma becomes a part of who we are, and it loses its focus because that wall that surrounds it becomes thinner. It becomes less. And you see, so it's able to share itself outward and into our experience over and over. So it may seem like it's getting worse before it gets better. But what it is we are dealing with it. And in that process of dealing with it, we're given more opportunities to deal with it so we can bring that light of Spirit on it. The same thing that happens with us happens as a group. As the group becomes more aware of the collective trauma, it begins to be expressed more often until the group, so that the group can become aware more often and shining the light of Spirit on the trauma. That's our opportunities. The trauma, you see, it wants to be integrated. And trauma is part of us. As an individual, we each participate in a small portion, our proportion of the collective trauma, and we share that with the entire group. I don't want to, in this talk, begin to give examples of collective traumas. I think if we'll be open, we'll be able to see plenty of examples of these collective traumas, whether it's in our family or in wider and wider groups. So take a moment to just quiet your mind and breathe. Breathing and relaxing. This present state, this calm presence, is shining that light of Spirit on the trauma. I would like to take this time now to share a song. I believe now, as I look back at the time when this song was written, that there is a trauma that was being integrated, or that was beginning to be integrated at the time that this song was written. It's carefully crafted so that the trauma is not stated openly. After all, these traumas are part of our shadow. So the tendency is not to share them, but to keep them in the dark. And even though we may want to bring that into our personal light of consciousness, it's a totally different thing to bring them into the awareness of others. The name of the song, it's a song I wrote again, and it's one I've sung to you before. I call it Blood, but I like to add to that title now and call it Love is Here Right Now. You see, that love and that compassion is shining that light on the trauma. shed the fear of unknown power. Frame the face of death against steel walls. Become faith is so near. The light and the night, feel the pulse of breath beneath is the feeling of the pain. Outside is the passion and the shame. Crimson is the color of his name. Mother is smiling and passions flow like water. Mountain of Redeemer, feeling ripen and feeling wild. Feel the root, feel the passion of glory. It's not the same as it was long ago. It's the taste, it's the feel of the story. Love will come like a rose will grow. Beneath is the feeling of the pain. Outside is the passion and the shame. Crimson is the color of his name. Love will come, love will come. Love will come, love will come. Love is here right now. 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 Love will come like the rose will grow. So you have this beautiful flower, but with it comes those thorns as we integrate the collective trauma, which is the hope of the beautiful flower. We experience these thorns. But love will come, because love is here right now. We bring that presence, that harmony of oneness, and shine the light of Spirit on that trauma. So I invite you, if you begin to become aware that a trauma is being triggered within you, take a moment. This is a great time to have a spirit break and remember the truth. Bring that presence into that moment and shine the light of Spirit on the trauma. The more we do this, the more we build our resilience. And any trauma, any traumatic event that might bring about a trauma becomes less significant because we bring ourselves into the presence of Spirit. Before we call this session finished, let's close with the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love. The power of God protects us. I am the power. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well. Thank you so much. Remember the invitation to take a spirit break.